Mail-order bride rejected for her short height, until a rancher saw perfection in her. The train screeched to a halt at the small station, its black smoke curling upward and dissolving into the endless prairie sky. Passengers spilled onto the wooden platform, clutching satchels and suitcases, their eyes scanning for the faces that would greet them. Among them stood a young woman with her hands knotted tightly around the handle of a faded carpetbag. Her name was Clara, and she had come west with the promise of becoming a wife. She stepped off the train with trembling legs, aware of the stares that followed her. Clara was small, shorter than most women by a head, her figure delicate, her dark hair pinned neatly beneath a plain bonnet. She carried in her pocket the letter of a man who had written her from this place, a man who had promised her a home, safety, and the chance to be loved. For weeks she had dreamed of standing in front of him, of being seen for more than what others had always whispered behind her back. But as she approached the man who matched the photograph she had memorized, his expression faltered. He looked her over with quick, assessing eyes. His mouth tightened, his hand remained at his side instead of reaching for hers. "You're not what I expected," he muttered. She tried to smile, to assure him she could be everything he needed, but he stepped back, his voice hardening. "You're too small. A rancher's wife needs strength, not someone who looks like a child." The words struck her like a blow, and for a moment she stood frozen on the platform while others walked past. The man who had promised her a new life turned away, leaving her with nothing but her bag and her shame. Clara swallowed hard, fighting the sting in her eyes, unwilling to let her tears be seen by strangers. She told herself she would not break, not here, not now. But as the crowd thinned, she realized she was alone in a land that felt vast enough to swallow her whole. She walked slowly toward the edge of town, unsure where to go, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and humiliation. Dust clung to her shoes, the sun bearing down mercilessly, but she kept moving, refusing to collapse on the very ground where her dreams had been shattered. She told herself she had survived worse, that rejection was not the end. Yet in her chest, hope was slipping away, leaving her hollow. It was then that a horse's hooves broke the silence. A tall rider approached, his broad shoulders casting a shadow across the dirt road. He slowed as he came near, his gaze fixed on the small figure trudging forward with her head bowed. He dismounted with ease, tying his horse to a post before stepping closer. His name was Samuel, a rancher whose land stretched wide beyond the hills, and though he had not come looking for a bride that day, something in Clara's weary stance pulled at him. "Ma'am," he said gently, tipping his hat. "You look lost." His voice was low and steady, carrying neither pity nor judgment. Clara hesitated, unsure if she should answer, but something in his eyes, clear, unguarded, steady as the land itself, made her lift her chin. She explained, in as few words as possible, what had happened at the station. Samuel listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening as he heard of the man who had dismissed her like an object unfit for use. When she finished, silence lingered between them, broken only by the creak of leather and the snort of his horse. Samuel studied her, not in the way others had, measuring her height, her build, but as if he were searching for something deeper, something she herself had nearly forgotten she carried. At last he said, "He was a fool." Clara blinked, startled by the certainty in his tone. "A woman's worth isn't measured in inches," he added. "It's measured in heart, and I can see yours plain enough." His words loosened something inside her, and for the first time since stepping off the train, she allowed herself to breathe fully. Samuel offered his hand, not as a claim but as an invitation. Clara looked at it, then at him, and after a pause she placed her small hand into his. The warmth of his grip steadied her trembling. He led her to his horse, helping her into the saddle with a care that carried no mockery. As they rode together toward his ranch, Clara's mind swirled with uncertainty. She had been promised a new beginning before, only to be cast aside. She feared trusting again, feared that hope would betray her once more. Yet as the wind rushed against her face and Samuel's steady presence anchored her, something fragile but unyielding began to take root within her. At the ranch, Samuel introduced her to the land, the wide fields where cattle grazed, the creek that sang through the valley, the house he had built with his own hands. Everything spoke of strength, but also of loneliness, as though the land itself had been waiting for someone to bring it warmth. Clara felt small standing in the midst of it all, yet Samuel's gaze never wavered, never faltered with doubt. In the days that followed, she worked beside him, her hands learning the rhythm of chores she had never known before. She rose before dawn to help prepare meals, carried water from the well, mended clothes by lamplight. Her body ached, but with each passing day she found new strength hidden within herself. Samuel noticed it, admired it, though he never said so in grand words. Instead, he showed it in the way he saved her the lighter tasks when her arms grew tired, or how he waited for her pace when walking the pastures. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the sky in crimson, Clara stood on the porch gazing across the horizon. Samuel joined her, his hands resting on the railing. For a long time they said nothing, content with the quiet. Then he turned to her, his expression firm yet tender. "You belong here," he said simply. The words sank into her like rain into dry soil. She had spent her life hearing what she lacked: height, strength, beauty, but in Samuel's eyes she saw no lack, only presence, only enough. She realized then that love did not come from fitting a measure set by others. It came from being seen, wholly, deeply, as she was. And in that moment, standing beside the rancher who had chosen to see perfection in her smallness, Clara understood that she had found not just a home, but the place where her heart could finally rest. The train's whistle was still echoing across the valley when Clara sat alone on the edge of the platform, her carpetbag at her feet, her hands clenched so tight around the handles that her knuckles burned. Her heart had broken in silence, without protest, without the chance to beg for a different ending. A promise had been shattered with only a handful of careless words. Too small, too weak, not enough. The other passengers had long since disappeared into wagons and carriages, welcomed by loved ones or employers. Only she remained, staring down at the dust swirling against her shoes, wondering how foolish she had been to travel halfway across the country believing a stranger's letter meant she was worthy of a place, a life, a family. But Clara had always been told she was too little, too frail, too insignificant. Her father had looked down at her when she tried to help in the fields, shaking his head with pity. Her mother had smiled at her as though she were a delicate ornament, meant to be admired but never depended on. The crueler voices of neighbors and schoolchildren had followed her from youth into womanhood, reminding her at every turn that her short stature marked her as different. She had thought the West would free her from that judgment. But even here, rejection found her. Still, Clara was not made of glass, though many assumed she was. Beneath her small frame was a will that had survived years of being underestimated. When the first sting of humiliation faded, anger began to rise, hot and steady. She would not return home defeated. She would not let the man's scorn undo her. She would go on. Somewhere, somehow, there had to be a place where she belonged. Her legs moved before her thoughts fully caught up. She lifted her bag and walked off the platform, leaving behind the station that had crushed her hopes. Dust clung to her skirt as she made her way down the road. Each step was heavy, but she forced herself onward, determined not to collapse before the world that seemed to mock her. It was in this moment of stubborn endurance that Samuel first saw her. He had come into town for supplies, salt, nails, and a new length of rope. But as he tied his horse outside the mercantile, his eyes caught sight of a small woman walking down the road, her back rigid, her stride quick but uneven, as though she were both escaping something and bracing herself against it. There was a pride in her stance, but also a loneliness so raw it pierced him. Samuel was not a man easily stirred by appearances. Life on the ranch demanded more of him than idle fancies. Yet something about the woman's quiet defiance called to him. He watched as a group of townsfolk glanced at her, then looked away with knowing smirks, whispers passing between them. Samuel felt a familiar burn in his chest, anger at the cruelty of judgment. He had seen it before, had lived it in different ways, for he too knew what it was to be looked at as though one did not measure up. When Clara nearly stumbled over a loose stone in the road and clutched her carpetbag tighter, Samuel's decision was made. He crossed the street toward her. "Ma'am," he said, his deep voice carrying gently but firmly. She halted, her wide eyes flashing with wariness. He tipped his hat. "You look like you could use a bit of help." Her throat worked before she managed to reply. I'm fine, thank you." But Samuel wasn't convinced. He noted the dust streaking her hem, the way her hands trembled around the bag, the exhaustion in her eyes. "Maybe so," he said evenly. "But fine folks don't usually walk alone down this road with no clear direction. Forgive me if I'm wrong." Clara almost turned away. She had been wounded too deeply that day to bear another man's judgment. Yet something in his eyes stopped her. They were not calculating or dismissive. They were steady, like the earth itself, holding space for her without demanding anything in return. She found herself speaking. Words spilled out in short, clipped fragments. About the letter. About the man who had promised her a life but turned away at first sight. About being rejected not for her heart, not for her spirit, but for her height. Samuel listened without interruption. His silence was not dismissive but attentive, like a man accustomed to letting the land speak before he moved upon it. When she finished, her voice cracking, she braced herself for his judgment. Instead, Samuel's jaw tightened. "He was a fool," he said simply. Clara blinked. "A woman's worth ain't measured in inches," Samuel continued, his tone steady, his gaze unwavering. "It's measured in grit, in heart, in how she faces the world when it tries to knock her down. And from where I'm standing, you've got plenty of that." For the first time that day, Clara's lungs loosened, allowing her to breathe fully. The sharp ache in her chest softened, though she scarcely dared to trust the relief. She searched his face for mockery, but found none. Samuel offered his hand. "I'm Samuel. My ranch is a few miles out. It's quiet, honest work. You'll have a roof and food, and no one to look at you like you're less than you are." Clara hesitated. Trust had already betrayed her once today. Yet something deep within her recognized sincerity when it was offered. Slowly, she placed her small hand into his. His grip was firm but gentle, steadying her like a handhold on a cliff's edge. He led her to his horse, helped her into the saddle, and guided them out of town. As the road stretched into open fields, Clara felt the sting of her humiliation begin to fade beneath the wide sky and Samuel's quiet presence. The ranch came into view, a sprawl of land kissed by sunlight, cattle grazing in distant fields, a sturdy house standing like a sentinel. It was not grand, but it was alive, breathing with the toil of honest hands. In the days that followed, Clara learned the rhythm of ranch life. The work was hard, far harder than the delicate tasks she had once been confined to. Her arms ached from carrying water, her fingers blistered from mending harnesses, her back sore from sweeping endless floors. Yet Samuel never laughed at her struggles, never criticized when her steps faltered. He worked alongside her, showing her patiently, quietly, until her body began to adapt. Each morning, Clara rose with the dawn, determined not to be useless. Each evening, she sat at the table across from Samuel, weary but proud. The silence between them grew less heavy, softening into something companionable. One evening, after a long day, Samuel found her standing on the porch, gazing out at the horizon where the sun bled red into the earth. Her hair was loose, stirring in the wind, and for a moment, Samuel forgot the loneliness that had been his companion for years. "You belong here," he said quietly. Clara turned, startled. "Do I?" "You do," He answered with certainty. Not because of what you can or can't do. Because of who you are. The words settled into Clara's heart like seeds in fertile soil. She had come west seeking a place to be wanted. She had found rejection, but in its shadow, something greater had taken root. Samuel did not see her as lacking. He saw her as whole. And in his steady presence, Clara began to see herself that way too. But the world beyond the ranch was not so forgiving. Whispers of her rejection at the station began to ripple through town, carried on the tongues of those who thrived on cruelty. And soon, Clara would be tested again, forced to prove that strength was not measured in inches but in the fire one carried within. The first whispers reached Clara a week later, carried by a neighbor who had stopped at the ranch gate. The woman's smile was pleasant, but her words carried barbs. "I heard about your arrival," she said lightly, as though she were speaking of the weather. "Must have been a hard blow, being turned away at the station. Some folks say you found charity here with Samuel." Clara felt her stomach tighten, but she kept her chin high. "I've found honest work," she replied, her voice steady. "And that's more than most whispers will ever be worth." The woman blinked, then left without another word. But the encounter lingered. Clara had thought distance from town would shield her from gossip, yet the sting of rejection had followed her. At night, when Samuel sat across from her at supper, she found herself retreating inward, fearing he too might one day listen to those voices and wonder if he had made a mistake. One evening, Samuel noticed the quiet cloud in her eyes. He set his fork down, the lamplight throwing shadows across his face. "What's weighing on you?" Clara hesitated, then admitted, "People are talking. They think I'm here because you took pity on me." Samuel's gaze didn't waver. "Is that what you think?" "No," she said quickly, though doubt pressed against her ribs. "But I don't want to be a burden. I don't want you to regret." "Clara," Samuel interrupted, his voice firm but gentle. "A burden doesn't rise before dawn to fetch water. A burden doesn't work until her hands blister and still find the strength to smile at the end of the day. I didn't bring you here out of pity. I brought you here because I saw truth in you. And I don't regret that for a second." Her breath caught, and for the first time in days, the knot in her chest loosened. Samuel's words carried weight, heavier than gossip, and she let them anchor her. As weeks passed, the ranch began to feel less like Samuel's and more like theirs. Clara learned the quirks of the cattle, the stubbornness of the mule, the rhythm of the seasons. She discovered that though her body was small, her determination was vast, and that strength came in many forms. One morning, a storm rolled across the plains, fierce and sudden. The sky darkened, the wind howled, and rain lashed against the earth. In the chaos, several calves broke through a weak section of fencing and bolted toward the creek, swollen and dangerous with floodwater. Samuel saddled his horse in seconds, but Clara was already pulling on her boots. "Stay inside," he ordered, rain streaking down his face. "No," she said, her eyes blazing. "I won't hide while you fight alone." For a moment, they locked eyes. Then Samuel nodded once, understanding the fire in her refusal. Together, they charged into the storm. The chase was brutal. Mud sucked at their feet, lightning split the sky, the calves panicked and scattered. Samuel rode hard, guiding the largest back toward safety, while Clara sprinted through the muck after a smaller one teetering dangerously close to the creek. Her legs burned, her chest heaved, but she did not stop. When the calf stumbled at the bank, Clara threw herself forward, grabbing hold of its slick hide with all the strength her small arms could muster. The animal kicked, nearly dragging her into the current, but Clara dug her heels into the mud and refused to let go. Inch by inch, she pulled it back until Samuel arrived and helped secure it with his rope. By the time the herd was safe again, Clara was soaked, shivering, her dress plastered to her skin. But in Samuel's eyes, there was something fierce and unshakable. "You saved it," he said, his voice thick with awe. Clara, breathless and trembling, whispered back, I saved myself too. That night, as the storm raged outside, Samuel sat across from her by the fire. His gaze lingered not on her small stature, but on the unyielding strength that radiated from her. At last, he reached across the table, his rough hand covering hers. "You're not just part of this ranch," he said. "You're part of me." Clara's throat tightened, but she did not look away. For so long, she had been told she was less. Now, in Samuel's words and eyes, she saw that she was more than others had ever allowed her to believe. But life on the frontier rarely allowed peace for long. Months later, trouble came not from storms but from men. The rancher who had once rejected Clara returned to town, his pride stung by whispers that the woman he had cast aside had found not just work but love. He carried himself with bitterness, muttering to anyone who would listen that Samuel had stolen what was meant for him. One evening, he appeared at the ranch gate, his posture stiff, his eyes sharp with resentment. "You took what wasn't yours," he spat at Samuel. "That girl was meant to be my wife." Clara stepped forward before Samuel could answer. Her voice cut through the air like a blade. "I was never yours. You gave up that right the moment you looked at me and saw only what I lacked." The man sneered. "You think you're better off here, a runt playing at being a rancher's wife." Clara's hands trembled, but her voice did not. "I don't play at anything. I work, I fight, I stand, and Samuel sees me, truly sees me. That's more than you ever did." Samuel's hand rested lightly on her shoulder, not to silence her but to steady her, to show her he was with her. The rejected rancher muttered curses under his breath before retreating, but the fire in Clara's chest did not fade. For the first time, she had defended not just herself but the life she had built. The days that followed cemented what had been growing quietly all along. Clara was no longer the woman who had arrived trembling and humiliated at the station. She was a partner in the ranch, a companion in Samuel's solitude, a force stronger than her small frame betrayed. One evening, as the stars scattered across the sky, Samuel and Clara sat on the porch in silence. The air was cool, the earth breathing after another long day. At last, Samuel spoke. "When you first stepped off that train, I thought you looked like a bird that had lost its way," he said softly. "Small, fragile, but I was wrong. You weren't lost. You were searching. And you found your place here. With me." Clara's eyes filled, not with sorrow but with a quiet, steady joy. "And you," she whispered, "saw me when no one else would." He took her hand then, not as a question but as a vow. And under the endless western sky, Clara knew the truth of what she had always longed for. She was not too small, not too weak, not too little to matter. She was enough, more than enough. And Samuel, the rancher who had seen perfection in what others rejected, would walk beside her for all the days ahead. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now. Watch another unforgettable tale where destiny and courage collide in the way you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.